Hey everyone, welcome to Easy Economics. How are you all doing? I hope you all are doing good. Today I brought for you all October November 2025 9708 Variant 12 Paper 1. We'll be looking at MCQs today. Let's see what this paper has brought for us today. Moving forward, MCQ number 1. MCQ number 1 says, what is an example of a normative statement? Now, we all know a normative statement is one that is based on value judgment. So, out of these four options, three must be positive statement, and there will be only one which would be a normative statement. And as we all know, positive statements are what? Which are factual, right? Which can be proved by evidences. Now, let's see. The first option says government expenditure is an injection into the circular flow of income. That's correct. B says government expenditure in India in 2022 was 29% of GDP. That could also be correct. So this means both A and B are positive statements. So we'll chop A and B. D says the United States of America is the country with the highest military expenditure. Again, a factual statement. So A, B, and D are all positive statements. It's C where it says the best policy measure to reduce inflation is a reduction in government expenditure. So now this is based on a value judgment. That means not necessarily that in all the situations a reduction in government expenditure would be able to curb or put a stop to inflation, right? So it depends. You can't always say that it would work. So for MCQ number 1, we'll shade in C as the correct response. Moving forward, MCQ number 2. MCQ number 2 says a public good must be both non-rivalrous in consumption and have the characteristic of non-excludability. So now we know that in order for a good to be classified as a public good, non-rivalry, that means the consumption of one does not reduces the consumption for another, and non-excludability, that means that you can't remove people from those who pay for the amount from those who do not pay for use of the service or the consumption of the good. So now they're saying which situation meets both of these conditions. So out of these four options, which would be classified as a public good meeting both of these two criteria, right? The first option says a former nationalized rail network which has been privatized. So now if you privatize a rail network, that means those who are going to pay for it are only going to be the ones who are going to be enjoying it. So you'll chop A simply because now it's being privatized. B says a good that has an opportunity cost. Again, if it's an opportunity cost, that means what? It cannot be a free good, right? So this means it cannot have the property of non-excludability. So you'll chop B. C says the building of a new toll road which charges all users the same toll. So now this means non-excludability cannot be the characteristic in it. Those who are going to pay are only going to be the ones who are going to be allowed to use that road, right? Unless you pay that tax, you won't be able to use that road for your commutation. So you chop C. D is the provision of street lighting which improves the locality. So now you can't exclude non-taxpayers from taxpayers. So even though you might not be paying for that facility, that does not deprive you of using the illumination or the lighting from that facility available, right? So you can't exclude people. And again, the consumption or the use of one does not reduce it for another. So if somebody is utilizing the light of, let's say, the street lamp, it does not reduce the consumption for another. So both of the situations are satisfied. So option D is the correct answer. So we'll shade in D for option 2 as the correct response. All right. Moving forward, MCQ number 3. What is not a characteristic of a planned economy? So this means out of these four options, there will be one option by looking at which you would say that it does not satisfy the situation of a planned or a command economy, right? Option A, consumers have limited influence on what is produced. That is a part of a command economy. Consumers do not have any say. It's the government that dominates, right? So we will chop A. Profit is the motive for increasing output. Yes, that's the correct answer because a command economy is not profit oriented. That's the feature of a market economy. So yes, that's the correct answer, but we'll see why it can't be C and D. C says resources are owned by government. That's correct, but here the option question is saying which is not a characteristic, but resources are owned by the government. That is a characteristic of a planned economy. So we'll show up C. D says there is limited competition in the market. When we are talking about planned economy, there's limited competition in the market. It's all being government owned, right? So we'll chalk D. Again, uh, for MCQ number 3, we'll shade in B as the correct response. All right. MCQ number 4, moving forward. A student chooses to study for a degree in engineering at a university rather than taking a job working as an apprentice engineer. So now what the student decides to do is he decides to pursue study rather than doing an apprentice job. So instead of doing that, if he would have opted for an apprentice, that would have lasted for 5 years. And while training, he would have also worked simultaneously. So now the question says, what will decrease the opportunity cost of this choice? So if he pursues studying, what would reduce the opportunity cost of this decision? This means what? This means his decision of choosing to study would be beneficial. Reread the question. What will decrease the opportunity cost? So that means he deciding to pursue education would be in favor. So out of these four options, which would help him be satisfied with the decision he made? Right? So there would be one option which would be in favor of pursuing education rather than pursuing the apprentice job. Option A says a decrease in the wages paid to apprentice engineers. That's the correct answer. But why? Because if the apprentice engineers are going to be paid less, so he would have been better off. Because imagine if he would have been working and then he would have been earning less, so he would have been regretting his decision. So we do not want him to regret his decision. That's the question. So for 4, it's A. But let's see why it can't be the remaining options. B says a decrease in the number of students studying engineering degrees. So that would have worsened his decision. So we'll chop B. C says a decrease in the number of top grade engineering degrees awarded. So if the value or the quality of the top engineering degrees would have been reduced, he would have been worsened off. So again, we'll chop C. D says a decrease in the length of engineering apprenticeship to 4 years. Again, if there would have been a decrease in the length of the apprenticeship, so it would also have been against his decision, right? It would have not improved the choice, but rather it would have worsened the opportunity cost. So we'll shade in A as the correct answer. MCQ number 5. MCQ number 5 displays a PPC curve. On the vertical axis, they've displayed good Y, and on the horizontal axis, they've displayed good X. Now they're saying that the country is producing these two goods, X and Y, and the initial PPC is ST. So ST is the initial PPC. Now what happens? Now, this thing, what would happen to the PPC if the productivity of workers producing good X increases? So now, if the workers who produce good X, their productivity increases. That means per unit of input, they are producing more of X. So how would this change be depicted through a PPC? This means now they will be producing more of X, since only the productivity of workers producing good X has risen. So the output of good X should increase. As a result, the PPC would now shift from ST to SW. So from ST, it should move to SW. This should be the increase. Why? Because no productivity increase has been witnessed by the workers of good Y, right? It's only in X that we have witnessed. So for 5, we'll shade in B as the correct answer. MCQ number 6. MCQ number 6 asks us simply for a definition of consumer surplus. And we know consumer surplus is what? That's the difference between the price the consumer is willing to pay and the market price. So look at the options. A says the amount of a consumer's income less the amount paid in income tax. B says the amount of a consumer's income less the amount paid for goods and services. C says the amount of a consumer's income received in bonuses in overtime pay. Again, all are incorrect. D says the amount of a consumer is willing to pay less the amount actually paid. That's exactly what the definition satisfies. The amount the consumer pays is willing to pay and the market price. That's the difference. So we'll chop A, B, and C, and D is the correct answer. So for 6, we'll shade in D. Moving forward, MCQ number 7. MCQ number 7 displays a market supply curve that's upward sloping. The vertical axis displays what? The price level. And the horizontal axis will display what? Quantity. That's exactly what they are asking. Now, the first part of the table displays what should be represented on the x-axis and what should be represented on the y-axis. That's the second part of the table. So looking at the options available, we know the horizontal axis or on the x-axis, what should be there? The quantity. And what should be there on the vertical axis? Price. So y or the vertical axis should display the price and the horizontal axis should display the quantity. Hence, we'll shade in B for MCQ number 7 as our correct response. Easy. MCQ number 8. MCQ number 8 displays a demand curve. Now they are asking what is the price elasticity of demand when it's unit elastic. Unit elasticity means when elasticity is equals to 1. So now we know when a demand curve is downward sloping, and in this scenario, so it's at the midpoint, the price elasticity of demand is equals to 1, which means it's unit elastic. Above that, price elasticity of demand is greater than 1, and below that, its price elasticity of demand is less than 1. So, what is the price at which PED is equals to 1? The midpoint, which means at $50. So, for 8, we'll shade in B as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 9. MCQ number 9 says, public transport in an economy has an income elasticity of demand of a negative 0.36. This means what? This means as income rises, the quantity demanded falls. Income rises, quantity demanded falls. So this means the negative side displays what? That it's an inferior good. Inferior good. So for 9, we'll shade in A. Moving forward, MCQ number 10. Which type of a good is most suitable for a successful buffer stocks scheme? Now, a buffer stocks scheme is designed to smooth what? The price rises, right? It's designed to smooth the price. So, a price rise or falls, what happens that this buffer stock scheme buys and sells stocks of products, right? Depending upon the market condition. So, it combines both the principles of maximum and minimum prices. So, it sets a minimum price if market price goes beyond it. So, what will the buffer stock scheme do? It will buy up the stocks, store it in the warehouses, and since the supply will then reduce, the price will automatically rise. So now what are they asking? They are asking what type of a good would be most suitable for a successful buffer stock scheme. So if you want to smoothen the price changes, so the product should not be easy to produce, because if it's easy to produce, there's no point in saving it or smoothing its price, right? So it should not be easy to produce. So you chop A and B because they are all saying yes in the first part. Cheap to store, yes. It should be easy to store, otherwise it would not be able to hold it in order to affect or influence its price. Perishable, no, it can't be perishable because if it go bad, if it go rot, so the entire purpose would be eliminated. So it should be no for easy to produce, easy to store, yes, and it should not be perishable. So for 10, it has to be C. Number 11, moving forward. The demand for electric vehicle batteries is derived from the demand for electric vehicles. So now the higher the demand for electric vehicles, the more the batteries would be demanded. So that means what? It's a complement, jointly demanded good. To tackle climate change, the government subsidizes producers of electric vehicles. So now the government is trying to provide a subsidy to the producers of electric vehicles. Now they're saying what would be the impact of this subsidy on the purchase and sales of electric vehicle batteries. So now what would be the impact of the provision of subsidies to the producers of electric vehicles? So what should be happen to the price of the electric vehicle batteries and what should happen to the sales? First, the sales of the electric vehicle batteries should increase because the sales of the vehicles would increase, provided of the provision of the subsidy would cause the output to rise, the sales would increase. So the sales of the battery should rise. So we'll chop A and B because they all saying that the sales would decrease. So it either has to be, oh my bad, we'll chop A and we'll chop C because both are saying decrease. But we want to in the sales of battery to increase. So it could either be B or C. But what about the price? Now, since the demand for electric vehicles would increase, this would cause the demand for batteries to increase. So when the sales would increase, the price would automatically increase. The demand for batteries should rise. So it should be an increase in price because higher demand would cause the price to increase and the sales should also increase because it's a jointly demanded good. So for 11, we'll shade in D as the correct answer. I hope this is clear. Moving forward, MCQ number 12. MCQ number 12 displays the market for a demerit good. Now, a demerit good is what? A good that is overconsumed and overproduced by the market. Now, initially, the market is at equilibrium at X. What will be the new equilibrium if the government imposes a unit tax on this demerit good and successfully inform consumers of its harmful effect? So now the government informs of its harmful effect, the demand should fall. So initially the demand is at D1, so the demand should move inwards to D3. And since the tax is imposed, so the supply should also fall. So the supply should move from S1 to S3 inwards and demand should also move inwards. So looking at both of these situations, the new equilibrium should be D. A reduction in demand and a reduction in supply. So for 12, we shade in D as the correct answer. Number 13. To improve the health of people, a government puts a tax on the sale of drinks that contain sugar. So now it's penalizing consumption of drinks that contains sugar. What are the likely effects of this tax on both the price of the drinks that contain sugar and the price of sugar? Obviously, the price of drinks that contain sugar would rise because of the imposition of the tax. What about the price of sugar? Now, since the demand for these drinks would fall, the price of sugar would fall. So the price of drink should increase and the price of sugar should decrease. So for 13, we'll shade in C as the correct answer. I hope this is clear. Number 14. Number 14 says The income Gini coefficient of a country changes from 0.29 to 0.33 over time. What might explain this? First, tell me what's a Gini coefficient. Gini coefficient is a numerical measure of income inequality. So it measures the level of disparity of income existing in an economy. So if income distribution is equal, the coefficient value is equals to 0. If it is 1, means that it's all accruing to one person, right? So that means the entire economy is on one part, right? So it's highly inclined, highly uh, income equality exists, right? So now they are saying closer to 0 would mean equal distribution. Now we look at the coefficient figure. It has changed from 0.29 to 0.33. This means what? Has it improved or has it worsened? It has worsened. So this means that the disparity has, or the inequality has risen. Now looking at these four options, what might explain this change? An increase in food and energy subsidies, an increase in structural unemployment, an increase in the national minimum wage, an increase in the top rate of income tax. If you look at option A, C, and D, all would cause a fall in the Gini coefficient value. Because if subsidies would have been given, so it would have been more, reduce the price. And as a result, more people would have been consuming it. If national minimum wage would have increased, people would have been better off. Again, the disparity should have reduced. If people earning or belonging to a higher income band are being charged a higher amount of tax or being taken a more proportion of tax, so the income disparity should have been reduced. But here the coefficient is worsening, right? So this means something negative has happened. So there is an increase in structural unemployment. That means those who there's only a limited proportion or a portion of a society that has been affected by uh, a closure of an industry or a decline of certain technical skills, leaving them unemployed. That is why this Gini coefficient has worsened. So for 14, we'll shade in B as the correct answer. I hope this is clear. Number 15, moving forward. What is an example of an injection into the circular flow of income in an open economy? In an open economy is one that is involved in international trade. Injection means that we are investing, right? So now the question is saying you're talking about additions to the circular flow of income. So A, C, and D are all what? Leakages, right? They are all withdrawals because A is consumer spending on goods, C is spending by households, D is repayment of loans. It's only expenditure on the construction projects that is in addition to the circular flow of income. So we'll shade in B as the correct answer. Number 16. Number 16 displays the aggregate demand curve and the aggregate supply curve. The vertical axis displays the general price level. The horizontal axis displays the national income or the output level. Now they're saying what is the likely effect on employment and the general price level of a small decrease in government expenditure. So if the expenditure decreases only by a small amount, what should happen to the level of employment and the general price level? So if we draw the aggregate demand curves a little inwards, now notice what would happen. The price level would fall, but there would be no change in the output level because the economy is operating at full capacity, right? It's perfectly inelastic, it's vertical. So employment would remain unchanged and the general price level would fall. So for 16, we'll shade in C. Moving forward, MCQ number 17. MCQ number 17 says it displays the aggregate demand curve and the aggregate supply curve. The vertical axis displays the price level and the horizontal displays the output. what would cause a change in the aggregate demand curve from AD to AD1? So now there's a fall in aggregate demand curve. Now they're saying what could be the reason. Now, A says government campaigns to increase household saving. Yes, that's the correct answer because when savings increase, spendings fall. And that is the reason why aggregate demand has fallen. So for 17, yes, A is the correct answer. But why it can't be B? Consumption of domestic instead of foreign goods. Because if domestic consumption would have been increasing, so aggregate demand would have been rising and not falling. But here the situation is opposite, so we'll choose B. C says a decrease in budget surplus. Budget surplus means that government revenue is falling and government expenditure is rising, right? But a fall in budget surplus would cause the aggregate supply to fall. So we'll choose C. It cannot be D because investment in knowledge-based industries would have caused aggregate demand to rise. Because when investment increase, aggregate demand increases. But here aggregate demand is falling. So we'll choose D. That is the reason why by logic and by elimination, A is the correct answer for MCQ number 17. Moving forward, MCQ 18. MCQ 18 says a government reduces the benefits that it pays to unemployed to increase incentive to work. So now it reduces the unemployment benefits because it wants more people to be a part of the labor force. Now they're saying which macroeconomic policies are being implemented if the government decides to reduce the amount of unemployment benefits. Now remember, when we are talking about government spending, we are talking about fiscal policy. So now the government is reducing its fiscal policy. It has nothing to do with money supply or interest rates. So monetary policy is not being talked about. So it has to be a negative sign. Supply side policy, yes. Why? Because we aim to increase the output level. We aim to increase the productive potential of the economy. So we're talking about supply side policy and we're talking about fiscal policy. We'll talk about option C. That's the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 19. A central bank is asked by the government to help achieve price stability. If inflation rises, which policy will not be directly in the control of the central bank? So now what a central bank cannot do in order to control inflation? Increase the rate of interest rate, that it can do. Manage a reduction of money supply, again that it can do. Use credit restriction to regulate lending by commercial banks to households, that it can also do by imposing a limit that households can borrow from banks. It's option D that it cannot talk about restricting the wage price spiral in private and public sector. So for 19, we'll shade in D. That's not in the hands of central bank. A, B, and C are all can be controlled by a central bank. MCQ number 20, moving forward. What is not a likely reason for government having the objective of economic growth? So now why do you think government would not pursue economic growth? To improve living standards? Yes, that would be the option. To improve business confidence? Yes, that could be the option. To increase consumer choice? That could be the option. To increase inflation pressure? Obviously, we never pursue economic growth to increase or put inflation or to reduce price stability. That we do not want, right? So for MCQ number 20, C is the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 21. Expansionary monetary policy is when we increase either money supply or we decrease interest rate. So the very first option which says the central bank increase the money supply, that's the correct answer. For so 21 will shade in A. Moving forward, MCQ number 22. What is the effect of an increase in money supply on the interest rate and the aggregate demand curve? So if we increase money supply, what should happen to the interest rate? If we increase money supply, what should happen to the interest rate? The interest rate should fall because the currency would depreciate and the aggregate demand would fall to the right, right? Because interest rate is falling. So now people would not find it lucrative to invest in the currency. So for 22, we'll shade in C as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 23, a country had a target inflation of 2.5, but it was experiencing 6% and unemployment fell. Which policy is most likely to be implemented? So now why do you think what could have been implemented? Inflation rose, unemployment fell. A could not be the correct answer because if training was there, so inflation would not have risen. B could not have fallen because if indirect taxes would have been imposed on demerit goods, so again inflation should have fallen and not risen. C could not be the option because again if import tariffs would have been implemented, increase in tariffs, so inflation should have fallen and not risen. It's D because increase in interest rates will cause the unemployment to fall and inflation to rise because it would be expensive for producers to expand, right? It would be costly to obtain loans on suitable rates. So for 23, we'll shade in D as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 24. What is most likely reason for a government to introduce a progressive tax? A progressive tax is a tax that charges a higher proportion from those earning higher amount of income. We want to do that because we want to distribute disposable income more equally because we want to reduce income inequality. That's the prime reason. For 24, we'll shade in B. Number 25, what is the least likely consequence of a rapid economic growth? That means economic growth would, this is something that would not be the result of economic growth. Yes, it would cause high levels of pollution. Yes, it would cause congestion in roads. Yes, it would cause a deficit in the current account of the balance of payment because it would cause high imports, maybe in order to produce or increase the domestic production. Maybe you are importing certain key raw material, but it could not be a deficit in the budget balance because economic growth means higher standard of living. So higher standard of living means you are earning more, so your revenue should be more than your spending. So it cannot be option C. So for 25, we'll shade in C as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 26. A country with a floating exchange rate has a large deficit on the current account. So if it has a large deficit, the deficit would put what? It would put a downward pressure, causing the currency to depreciate. So hence what would happen? Exports would get cheaper. So the price of exports should fall. It cannot be A because as exports are getting cheaper, so the country's exports competitiveness should increase and not fall. It cannot be B because it depends on the export demand. It could not be the direct consequence. C is the correct answer because since it would put a downward pressure and the currency would depreciate, so the exports would get cheaper, so the price of exports from the current of the country's goods should fall. So for 26, we'll shade in C as the correct answer. It cannot be D again because rate of inflation in the country would not would rise and not fall. So we'll stop in D. It's C is the correct answer for MCQ number 26. Moving forward, MCQ number 27. What will definitely lead to an improvement in the terms of trade? So terms of trade is the ratio of export prices to ratio of import prices. So when export prices are rising and nothing is happening to import prices, they remain the same. So obviously the terms of trade has to improve. So for 27, we'll shade in D as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 28. MCQ number 28 displays multiple aggregate demand and supply curves with X as the equilibrium position. Price level is displayed on the vertical axis, real output displayed on the horizontal axis. Now they're saying the UK pound sterling depreciated by 11% against a basket of goods. Now they're saying if initial aggregate demand curve is AD1 and AS1 is initial supply curve, what should happen to the new equilibrium position if the currency has depreciated. So now if the currency had depreciated, so what would happen, that exports should be cheap, and when exports would be cheap, so aggregate demand should rise and aggregate supply should fall because imports would get expensive. So the supply curve should shift inwards and the aggregate demand should shift outwards. So A should be the new equilibrium position. So for 28, we'll shade in A as the correct answer. Moving forward, MCQ number 29. What is the effect of a cut in countries' income tax rates? So if income tax rates are cut, what should happen to exports and what should happen to imports? Imports should rise because people would be spending more. Exports should remain unchanged because nothing should happen to the uh, exports because they are not related to home country, right? It's related to foreigners. So it's nothing to do with us because it's related to their demand of our goods. So for 29, we'll shade in the final MCQ. This talks about the supply curve and the demand curve. Now, initially there was a tariff being imposed that had caused the price to be high. Now, if the tariff is removed, they are asking what should happen to the consumer surplus and the government revenue. So now we know that the consumer surplus should fall because that represents the difference between what the consumer pays and what it was ready to pay. The difference between the market price and what it was ready to pay. And they are asking about the government revenue. So now, since the tariff has been reduced, the government revenue falls by this amount, WVXT, and the consumer surplus increases because now it is able to buy more. So it is P1 VUPT, P1 P2 VU. This amount is by which the consumer surplus would rise. And we all know consumer surplus is what? That is the difference between the price the consumer is willing to pay and the market price. I hope this is clear and you enjoyed solving this paper with me. Stay tuned, subscribe, happy learning. I'll be back with more such papers.